The singing lesson by Katherine Mansfield. This is an easy explanation video number 1. But before starting the easy explanation, let us come to page number 90. Katherine Mansfield revolutionized the 20th century English short story. Her best work shakes itself free of plots and endings and gives the story for the first time the expansiveness of the interior life, the poetry of feeling, the blurred edges of personality, psychology and behavior of her characters. And her fiction retains its relevance through its open endings, its ability to raise discomforting questions about identity, belonging, and desire. The singing lesson is a short story in the collection The Garden Party and Other Stories by Katherine Mansfield, published in 1922. In it, the themes of despair, sadness, reliance, appearance, desperation, happiness are explored in the character of the protagonist. Learn this part. Learn the themes of the singing lesson. And who is the protagonist? The protagonist of this short story is Miss Meadows. And when you are preparing yourselves for the examination, do write an answer, a descriptive answer, a character sketch of Miss Meadows, the protagonist. Frustrated feminine aspirations, the suppressed self, sense of loneliness, injured or thwarted love are crucial to the understanding of the singing lesson. The techniques of modernist fiction can easily be detected in the first paragraph of the singing lesson. The story begins in medias res, M-E-D-I-A-S-R-E-S, Latin, and the meaning is middle of action. A technique associated with the epic, but which has been effectively employed in modernist fiction, especially in the short story, a form which needs to function within the restrictions of space and time. With no clear beginning or a well-defined backstory, the readers are plunged right in the middle of an action which is both physical and emotional. Let's read and see for ourselves. With despair, cold, sharp despair. What kind of despair? Cold, sharp despair. And what is despair? The complete loss or absence of hope, hopelessness is the meaning of the word despair. With despair, cold, sharp despair, buried deep in her heart like a wicked knife, Miss Meadows, in cap and gown, her academic dress. She is a music teacher, a singing teacher at an all-girls school. And this is her academic dress. And carrying a little baton. Baton is a thin stick which is used by a conductor to direct an orchestra or choir. Trod, walked down the cold corridors, an alliterative expression that led to the music hall. She is going to the music hall. This is her professional space. The first noun of the first line of the story is an emotion, despair, and this emotion is given the metaphor of a knife. It is interesting to see that we are told about the emotion even before being told about the name of the character to whom the emotion is attributed. With despair, cold, sharp despair buried deep in her heart like a wicked knife, here we get the name of the protagonist. The picture of the protagonist is painted in a gradual manner. The protagonist's emotion is described, then she is given a name, followed by a physical form, and finally we are told that she is a music teacher. The story initially describes Miss Meadows' despair, but not the cause of it. Remember this. Possibly because her despair has complex causes. The story shows that she feels that she has a knife buried in her heart, and this is quite a dramatic description of her suffering. Girls of all ages, rosy from the air, blushing and bubbling over with that gleeful excitement that comes from running to school on a fine autumn morning, hurried, skipped, fluttered by from the hollow classrooms came a quick drumming of voices, a bell rang, a voice like a bird cried, "Muriel!" And then there came from the staircase a tremendous knocking. Someone had dropped her dumbbells. The students, the girls of all ages, were bubbling over with that gleeful excitement. The meaning of the word gleeful is delighted. And drumming. The word drumming means a continuous rhythmic noise, and dumbbells is a type of free weight, a piece of equipment used in weight training. There is a contrast here. Notice, Miss Meadows is filled with despair and the girls are filled with gleeful excitement. This is important, and while writing the answers, do highlight this point. The contrast, the comparison. Next. The science mistress stopped Miss Meadows. We have another character here, the science mistress. "Good morning," she cried in her sweet, affected drawl. What is drawl? Now, drawl is a slow, lazy way of speaking or an accent with prolonged vowel sounds. Here I'll just briefly mention another aspect. The opening paragraph is an example of stream of consciousness technique used by the modernists. The lines may appear to be a random, disjointed collection of thoughts and images, but if we take into consideration the psychological aspect of this, the modernists realized that the human mind does not process the world in a logical, coherent manner, but latches onto impressions caused by the sensory stimulus. Thus, the oral effect of sounds in the first paragraph, the girls running, bubbling, fluttering, the ringing of a bell, and a voice calling for Muriel, show the impression caused in the mind of the character. It is just not merely a description provided by a third-person narrator, but a description as is experienced in the protagonist, Miss Meadows' mind. Isn't it cold? It might be winter. We have Miss Meadows who is filled with despair. We have the girls who are rosy and blooming. Miss Meadows, by contrast, feels that she is already becoming cold and aged like the autumn, winter. And we also have the science mistress who has a sweet, affected drawl, and Miss Meadows, hugging the knife, stared in hatred at the science mistress. Miss Meadows does not like the science mistress. When she stops Miss Meadows and she mentions the cold weather, Miss Meadows does not like it. The science mistress looks sweet and blonde, notices that Miss Meadows looks cold. When the science mistress appears to be asking kindly if Miss Meadows is cold, Miss Meadows thinks something else is happening, that perhaps the science mistress has noticed her despair and is cruelly commenting on it. Miss Meadows hides the truth about her feelings from the science mistress. She does not reveal the emotional anguish that she is suffering. She is hugging the knife of the deep-rooted pain, and she stares at the science mistress in hatred. Everything about her was sweet, pale like honey, a simile. You would not have been surprised to see a bee caught in the tangles of that yellow hair. The science mistress has yellow hair, and tangles means confused twisted mass cluster. It is rather sharp. Miss Meadows curtly replies to the science mistress. Said Miss Meadows grimly. The other smiled her sugary smile. She feels that the science mistress is pretentious and is mocking her. You look frozen. Indeed, she is frozen. Emotionally, she is in a very bad state of mind, said she. Her blue eyes opened wide. There came a mocking light in them. Had she noticed anything? Well, Miss Meadows feels apprehensive. She is trying her level best to hide the main cause of her despair and the despair as well. Now, oh, not quite as bad as that, said Miss Meadows, and she gave the science mistress, in exchange of her smile, a quick grimace and passed on. She smiled, and what did Miss Meadows do? She gave her a grimace. What is a grimace? An ugly, twisted expression on a person's face, typically expressing disgust, pain, or wry amusement. Look how she is behaving with the people around her. This story explores the feelings of Miss Meadows, who is finding it really hard to deal with her emotions, the people around her, and life in general. Forms 4, 5, and 6 were assembled in the music hall. The noise was deafening. On the platform by the piano stood Mary Beasley. We have another character, and who is Mary Beasley? She is Miss Meadows' favorite student who played accompaniments. She was turning the music stool. When she saw Miss Meadows, she gave a loud warning, "Shh, girls!" And Miss Meadows, her hands thrust in her sleeves, the baton under her arm, strode down the center aisle, mounted the steps, turned sharply, seized the brass music stand, planted it in front of her, and gave 2 sharp taps with her baton for silence, quite mechanical. When she arrives in the classroom, the students are noisy. Her favorite student, Mary Beasley, is preparing her seat at the piano, and Mary hushes the other students when the teacher walks into the room. Miss Meadows taps her baton and demands silence without looking directly at Mary or anyone else. And why is it so? She imagines that the students will think she is angry today. Miss Meadows is expecting unsympathetic judgment from her students, but she is also cold to them, in particular towards Mary Beasley, who is trying to please her by preparing her seat at the piano. Her feeling that she must defend herself and her despair from the unkindness she expects makes her behave unkindly herself. She is treating everyone with coldness. Silence, please, immediately, and looking at nobody, her glance swept over that sea of colored flannel blouses with bobbing pink faces and hands, quivering butterfly hair bows, quivering, trembling, and music books outspread. She knew perfectly well what they were thinking. Maddie is in a wax. Well, let them think it. Her eyelids quivered, trembled. She tossed her head, defying them. What could the thoughts of those creatures matter to someone who stood there, bleeding to death, pierced to the heart by such a letter? For the first time, we get a clue. We get a direct mention of a letter, which is perhaps the cause of her bleeding heart. Let's see now. Miss Meadows feels defiant in the face of her students' judgment. Their opinions don't matter to her, since today she is bleeding to death, pierced to the heart by a letter that her fiancé Basil left to end their engagement. This is very, very important. This letter is an announcement that their engagement is ended. Lost love. This reveals the cause of Miss Meadows' despair. Basil has ended their engagement. I feel more and more strongly that a marriage would be a mistake. Now that I feel more and more strongly that a marriage would be a mistake. Not that I do not love you. I love you as much as it is possible for me to love any woman. But truth to tell, I have come to the conclusion that I am not a marrying man, and the idea of settling down fills me with nothing but, and the word disgust was scratched out lightly and regret written over the top. He wrote that he loved her as much as it is possible for him to love any woman, but that the notion of marriage makes him feel disgust. However, he lightly crossed out disgust and wrote regret over it. Perhaps he is phobic. He has a commitment phobia. This is therefore very heartbreaking for Miss Meadows. Basil. For the first time, we come to know that the name of her fiancé is Basil. The exclamation mark is very important. Basil. Notice, this is an outburst of Miss Meadows, crying out Basil's name. Oh my God, Basil! Miss Meadows stalked over to the piano. She has to carry on with her singing lesson. And Mary Beasley, who was waiting for this moment, bent forward. Her curls fell over her cheeks while she greeted Miss Meadows. Good morning, Miss Meadows. And she motioned towards, rather than handed to her mistress, a beautiful yellow chrysanthemum. Beautiful yellow, a vibrant warm color, chrysanthemum. Learn the symbolism of the flower chrysanthemum. Learn this answer. This little ritual, this is a ritual. This little ritual of the flower had been gone through for ages and ages, quite a term and a half. It was as much part of the lesson as opening the piano, customary action. But this morning, instead of taking it up, instead of tucking it into her belt while she leant over Mary and said, "Thank you, Mary, how very nice." Turn to page 32. What was Mary's horror, her reaction, when Miss Meadows totally ignored the chrysanthemum, made no reply to her greeting, but said in a voice of ice, icy voice, the coldness. Page 14, please, and mark the accents well. So thinking of this, thinking of the letter, Miss Meadows walks to the piano where Mary Beasley greets her and offers her a yellow chrysanthemum. Mary has done this every day for a term and a half, which seems like ages and ages. For the first time, instead of greeting Mary and accepting the flower, Miss Meadows ignores Mary, ignores the flower, and speaks to the students coldly, ordering them to open their books. Mary blushes and nearly cries. The thought of Basil's cruel breakup letter prompts Miss Meadows to be cruel to Mary Beasley in turn. She is not only lost in thought, she is outright unkind to Mary by refusing to speak to her or accept the gift that Mary offers her every morning. What is the symbolism of the beautiful yellow chrysanthemum? Now this had become a daily ritual and symbolizes the act of Miss Meadows embracing life. Filled with happiness on being engaged at the age of 30 to a man 5 years younger, she exudes this positivity even in her workplace. But when the story begins, Miss Meadows is full of despair after reading the letter from her fiancé. That morning, instead of taking the flower from Mary, she ignores the gesture. The refusal of the flower symbolizes that there is no more joy and happiness in her life. Her life seems bereft of everything except despair and bitterness, and hence she is unable to appreciate this sweet gesture. The yellow chrysanthemum is also a symbol of youthful joy. But today, Miss Meadows is not joyful or hopeful. Staggering moment. This is indeed a staggering moment for Mary Beasley. Mary blushed until the tears stood in her eyes, but Miss Meadows was gone back to the music stand. She did not even notice Mary. Her voice rang through the music hall. Page 14. We will begin with page 14. So the song A Lament is on page number 14. Now girls, you ought to know it by this time. Again, Miss Meadows has chosen a song named Lament. And we all know what is a lament. When do we lament? When we are sad, when somebody dies, when something bad happens to us. So the emotional upheaval in Miss Meadows is reflected in the choice of the song. Now girls, you ought to know it by this time. We shall take it all together, not in parts, all together and without expression. Sing it, though quite simply, beating time with the left hand. She raised the baton, she tapped the music stand twice. Down came Mary at the opening chord. Down came all those left hands, beating the air, and in chimed those young, mournful voices. Fast too fast fade the roses of pleasure. Soon autumn yields unto winter drear. Fleetly, fleetly, music's gay measure passes away from the listening ear. In the next session, in video number 2, we are going to analyze the song in detail. The next session is going to be more interesting.